Okay, so you guys don't know this, but this is like my third time recording because I forgot to share my screen last time. And the time before, I forgot to allow Zoom to record my screen. And then the first time I just messed up, but whatever. So I'm Yasha. I'm Yasha. I'm a PhD in chemistry. I defended in September, and I always get confused because I'm just like, how do I introduce myself? But yeah, so I'm used to saying I'm a PhD candidate or a PhD student. But yeah, I'm a PhD. I have the degree. And I'm going to share with you guys my tips and techniques. I've just been looking at a lot of figures and presentations that could be easily improved just using PowerPoint or Excel. And a caveat is that personally, I use Adobe or Affinity software. Affinity is very powerful and like Adobe software, except that it's a one-time fee instead of a monthly subscription. But Adobe software is free through Penn State, my university that I'm at. And so I started on like Illustrator and Photoshop. But now that I'm looking at jobs and stuff, I want to set myself up so that way I still have a workflow. I just use it because it's faster and easier for me, but everything I do on Illustrator or on Designer can be done on PowerPoint or Excel. Like making figures pretty is not difficult if you know what to do. And there's so much you can do. Like there's no way I can talk about everything because there are whole courses designated to data visualization and design. There's so much to cover. And I'm just going to try to make some quick videos just helping make it so that way you can make beautiful figures in half the time. But yeah, so the first thing I want to talk about is accessibility because it is really important that you make your figures accessible. There's no point in putting in tons of effort and tons of time if people cannot see and read what you've done. I mean, that's just, I don't know, that's like the simple rule that I follow. I'm just like, I need to put in effort, but I also need to make sure my effort is for a good reason. And so the two main things are colors and typography. So for colors, you want to make sure your stuff is colorblind friendly because a lot of people have red-green color blindness, and it's mostly white men, but white men are also the majority of academia right now. So it is important to make sure the people who have the power to promote you can see your data. And then the other thing is typography. That's just making sure your fonts and stuff are legible. Someone who actually is into design is gonna like kill me for my gross oversimplification. But basically, you want for web-based stuff to make sure you use a sans serif font. So like Comic Sans is a great example. Obviously, everyone hates Comic Sans, but it is very legible. And so if you don't want to be the person using Comic Sans, other alternatives are stuff like Helvetica, Corbel. My personal favorite, a Mac is Avenir. Windows doesn't have an equivalent, but you can download Metropolis, and I love it. I just find Avenir and Metropolis to be look super polished, and whenever I use them in my presentations, I get a lot of positive feedback. Like people really enjoy the way it looks. Um, it might also just be that my lab is like super picky and notices fonts. But for like written stuff, I tend to use Arial just because it's simple. Every computer should have Arial already pre-downloaded. So there's like no room for what's it called? Like error, I guess. I don't know. There was a word I wanted to say. It wasn't error, but okay. And that's the word I'll use. But yeah. So I am procrastinating on something right now. So let's go straight into the material. So this video will be quick and simple, and then I can go back to the work I should be doing. But here we go, sharing the screen. I use Coolors, COOLORS.co to find palettes. They have lots of different trending palettes, so you can just go through, find a palette you like. Say you really like this one, you can open it in the generator. And the generator is where I spend most of my time. Bum, bum, bum. It is loading. Oh no. Error. Okay. Good thing I had another tab open. So the generator looks like this. This was just a color palette I randomly picked up. You can see it has names for all the colors. I don't care what the name is. If you press space, it will change to a different palette. But like say I'm like, oh, I really like this color. I love sky magenta. Then it will pull up other colors and keep sky magenta. So you can just like keep locking them until you make a palette that you like. Okay, so we're gonna go with this palette. It has variety of colors. And say, now what we can do is we can click on these sunglasses and it will go through and tell us what this color palette looks like with different kinds of color blindness, which is really awesome. We actually did a pretty good job at making sure this color palette, so this, a bit too similar. We'd probably want to change one of those colors. But other than that, we did actually a pretty good job at making sure this is a accessible palette. We can also go through, we can just copy these hex codes. We can change it to CMYK or RGB. I personally prefer staying in RGB. That's just like a personal preference thing, but I know other people, like I'm also mostly self-taught or go to random like seminars, and like all of my knowledge is like a mishmash of different things. So I prefer RGB. I don't know if that's like best thing to do or whatever, but that's my personal preference. Also with the website Coolors, you can also import your own palette. So if you found like an image you really like you take a picture of a sunset and you're just like, I want this to be my color palette, you can upload that image and then take the eyedropper tool and like get your favorite orange, your favorite blue, and just, yeah. Coolers has lots of power. It is highly recommended. But you can also just search for colorblind friendly palettes if you don't want to go through the effort of making your own. If you click images, there's a lot of different ones you can look at. There's this one with 15 colors. Yeah, this someone else made this. I personally like David Math Logic, Coloring for Colorblindness. He goes through and talks a lot about colorblindness and why we see the colors differently and like what actually is happening. And then at the end, he has these color palettes from IBM, Bang Wong, and then Paul Tall. Personally, I like the Wong color palette. I feel like it's still colorful but slightly muted. So that way it's just appealing to the eye. There is the IBM palette. This palette I would definitely use for more presentation based stuff, just because I like pops of color and I think it's eye catching and more exciting. But for written text, I would definitely go for something a little bit more muted. And I just have an example of a paper that I recently submitted where I used the Wong color palette. I just used it to do like orange versus blue versus black versus green. I tried to stay consistent between the graphs as well. So like here, CMP is in black, CMP in active is in green. And then if you scroll to the next figure, you see the same thing. And then the next figure, you see the same. And then here within the different colors, we had two different types of data sets. So we used solid versus filled bars. And then this was my favorite, where I got to use a couple extra colors instead of the 4 main ones that you can see throughout the data. And then, so just small comments. For me, when I'm making graphs, I like to have the axes bolded, both the text and the line itself. I just find that easier to look at. And then everything else is clear space. So none of those like light lines or bars. I find those make it a little harder to see the data. Sometimes it can be nice, but for the most part, like with these, there's so much data, it would just look cramped and busy. And plus you have the text to like figure legend or the results and discussion to actually like go into details. So I don't think those lines are very helpful. And then always just make sure your axis label is bolded and legible. I try to stay with the same font size for the legend and the axis label. Both of these are Arial. This is 16, this is 18. And then here with the dots, I like to make sure that there's size 2 or 3. And personally, I find sometimes that the circles and squares look similar when you have a lot of data points. So I try to do either fill or non-fill or circles and diamonds. And so with these data points, like with the blue, if those were squares, I would not be able to tell the difference between a square and a circle. And I think whenever possible, you should also do the difference between shape and color, just to like really drive home that these two data points are different. I mean, some people might think it's unnecessary, but I just think it doesn't hurt. Like I know some journals you do have to actually pay more for color, but if you're not, then it doesn't hurt to just definitely make sure your data is easy to read. And then finally, the last thing, I prefer to have this thick bar on the outside and then the light fill. I just find that appealing. That's just a personal preference, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that. You by no means have to. I feel like if this wasn't bolded, it would look just as nice, but I think this looks cleaner and more polished. So that's why I do a box around my bars. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. Um, and let's get into the actual making of you or using PowerPoint and Excel to make graphs look nicer. Before I got there, I'm going to upload this video first. So make sure to stay tuned. The PowerPoint video and Excel video, I will try to upload tomorrow. There is no way that I can do all of these videos in a short amount of time. So I'm going to break them down into more focused topics. And if you have any questions or tips or things you're struggling with, feel free to reach out and I'll make sure to address it. The color blindness one was actually something someone asked about because their reviewers were not liking their color palette, which sometimes happens. It's frustrating for sure, but sometimes it happens. You can't please everyone every time. And obviously, reviewers are someone you have to try to please for the most part, but it is what it is. See ya, guys. Bye.